Greetings, explorers of the unknown. Join us at Paranormal M to unravel stories that defy logic. Subscribe and enable notifications to stay updated on our latest mind-bending tales. Enjoy the adventure. A simple ghost story. Do you have one like it? One summer during college, I moved into a new dorm room for about 6 weeks. A fellow student told me it was haunted. I didn't believe him, frankly, I still don't. However, it's been about 20 years and I can't deny it was an odd room, because little things kept happening. The first thing I noticed was the sound of spare change settling in my jars. Allow me to explain that. I used to keep quarters in jars so I could quickly grab a few on the way to the vending machine. I kept the lesser coins in other jars, so I could take them to the coin bank when I had enough. And the first night in that room, I noticed the sound of all the coins shifting in the jars. I didn't think much of it. A simple temperature change will do that. But it kept happening all night, every night. It seems like they couldn't settle all that far in a jar that small. Then a pencil would roll off my desk. No biggie. Air conditioner draft or something. Then a poster would fall off the wall. Probably cheap tape. Then the change would rattle again. It just kept going. One night I woke up because the guy in the top bunk above me was moving around so much that it shook the whole bed. Then I remembered I was alone. I jumped up and checked, but no one was up there. Of course, that's just a dream, right? Or midnight leg spasm, surely. Overall, not a single thing was really strange about that room, but I eventually found it unsettling that the little noises and movements just kept on going. I've never heard a room make so much noise ever since. In fact, that room gets creepier the older I get, as I realized how unique that situation really was. I'm not saying it was haunted, but I am saying that I finally understand those old poltergeist stories about the house ghosts who go around touching things. Dreams that are too real. Too real. Sometimes I have these dreams when I sleep, and bear with my lack of writing luster, so I wake up in my dream and it's reality. I wake up in my bed, just as it was when I went to sleep, but time is still in this reality. When I return to my bed and body in this dream, I wake up in actual reality, but there's signs of what I did in the dream world. It's starting to freak me out more. Let's start with my oldest memory of it. I would wake up in my bunk bed and I would walk outside my house. I had this ability to basically double jump and would float and fly, kind of. I would hover myself to the playground, which was attached to the grade school behind my house, and would stargaze or move the school toys around. So when I actually woke up, I would know where my favorite toys were hiding. When I actually woke up, I had full memory of this dream. I would have dirt on my clothes, or my hair would actually be tangled, almost like it was windswept. The weirdest part is the toys sometimes would be where I hid them the following morning. Kids in our grade school didn't organize the toys after recess. We'd check in. Yes, we had a check-in and out system. And then a big trash can and go inside. Next big milestone was middle school. I had similar dreams with the floating ability, except it wasn't the playground or toys. I would instead now just float to the retention pond area next to my house and would just look up at the stars from atop the giant willow tree. It was my favorite spot and I would frequent this place. Now with this one, only like twice out of 100 times I found willow leaves in my bed with me. This continued for years until high school, and my stress and depression was so bad I stopped dreaming altogether. I talked about it with a therapist during high school who said I was most likely sleepwalking. However, I disproved that easily by tying myself to the bed, setting up bells on my doors and windows, and asking my parents if they've ever noticed me sleepwalking. The answer was no, and none of my safeguards ever moved or changed the mornings when I woke up. I'm now 27, married, and living with my husband, and my dreams have returned here or there. I quote-unquote wake up my husband next to me. Our cats are on our bed, and now for some reason I'm floating around aimlessly and feel miserable and lost. I look up and it's just this hazy purple-black sky with no stars anymore. I begin to feel extremely detached and almost warp back to my body and actually wake up feeling exhausted, drained, and empty. I've noticed bruises forming on my back and legs more often too, like 3 bruises in either a straight line or a triangle-like pattern. Unsure if related or not, just thought I'd put that here too. It's so odd because if I don't have these dreams, I'm extremely happy, healthy, and doing great. What the hell did I just experience? I'm right now in our family cabin in the middle of a forest in Sweden. I'm in a bed on the first floor while my parents are on the other side of the house, and some relatives are on the second floor. We're celebrating Christmas here, and we'll be here for additionally 4 more days. Okay, so I fell asleep around 12 a.m. and I woke up at 1:30 a.m. feeling absolutely amazing. I'm doing a lot of inner shadow work, and last night relieved massive amounts of things that I've been holding on to. I was feeling completely at peace, almost blissful, and I called for my cat. He jumped on me and purred like never before, obviously feeling my good vibes. I pet him for about 5 minutes as he suddenly jumps down from me and stops purring. At the same time, I start feeling some weird feelings in my throat, almost like electricity. The air got more dense and the temperature in the room was suddenly a lot colder. My cat jumps up on my chest again and I pet him when he starts to purr again. In the dull light in the room, I can see the mirror and the door that's half opened. My cat can see something. His head is turned to different spots in the room, not only where the doors are, but on the other side of my bed as well. Not only that, there's strange sounds in the room like it can be when staying inside of an old house like this, from 1850-ish. When it's windy outside, but it's not. It's silent and still, but the sounds are there and my cat looks at the exact same spot as the sounds come. I have goosebumps all over my body. Next thing that happens is that I see small, subtle light balls in the room. One in the mirror, one that comes around the door from the outside, and one more inside of the room. They're almost green and very subtle, but I can see them. The air is thick and it's almost hard to breathe, and I barely manage to be grounded and not freak out. I'm about to go up and turn on the light, but decide to be still and see what happens. My body feels almost electric and tense, and the room is cold, hard to breathe, feels like breathing electricity in. Suddenly it stops and my cat jumps down and leaves the room. It's still cold in here, and I'll have to take a sleeping pill if I'm ever going to be able to sleep. I'm a bit scared, but I'm okay, and because the dense air, lights, and sound is gone, I feel safe. My cat surely protected me there, thank God. It helped a lot even though he was staring at something in the room, freaking me out. What could it have been? I have never, ever experienced something like this. I'm happy it's over and have to say I'm proud of myself managing to be so calm during whatever this was. What just happened to me? I live in Peoria, Arizona, and currently am on summer break after my first year at university. And I love to take walks around the neighborhood with my little brother and also the back of the house, which has all sorts of dirt trails. Last night, 5/8, I decided to take a walk around 11 p.m., just to stroll around the block. It lasted about 25 minutes and the weather had a soft breeze. My little brother didn't accompany me because he had fallen asleep. A few hours later, this is just 2 hours ago, 5/9, I got bored and decided, why not? Why not take another walk? Sounded fun and the weather was perfect, and this time I took a different route, a dirt road with no light. I did have a flashlight that Ellie sort of led to an adjacent neighborhood. I took a walk around the new neighborhood and then went back to the dirt road that led to my neighborhood. This dirt trail has some brush right at the beginning of the way down. Now at this point, I had not seen a single person and it was 3 a.m. Just some cars whizzing by every now and then. As I begin to go around this brush to the dirt neighborhood, I notice a man walking up the dirt road towards me. Now he's not that far behind the brush, maybe only 15 feet away from me. At this point, everything happened so fast as we're walking down and up each opposite end of each other. Now this guy was 15 feet away from me, so of course I was going to say something like, "Have a good night," or "Later, bro." But as I stop, he keeps walking towards me, and I repeatedly say, "Hey," to him, trying to get an acknowledgement. But this man, mind you, he looks like he's a mid-30s wearing flannel and a hat, walks right through my body. I mean, literally, it's like he just phased through me. This scared the living shit out of me because I knew I just saw a bearded man with a hat covering his face walk through my body. It is unexplainable. Suddenly I felt adrenaline and pulled out my knife. I turned around and I see nobody there. Then I pull out my flashlight and aim it at his direction to see nothing but brush. I wanted to run home, but something in my mind was fascinated. But that feeling was nothing compared to the fear. And so I started walking back down the dirt road to my home as I hear voices from probably neighbors. Then I instinctively look back behind me again, wouldn't you? And I see the same man as he starts to dance like a weirdo. At this point, I'm spooked and I start speed walking home with knife and flashlight in hand. And as I look back with the light again, he's still dancing creepily, but not walking toward anywhere. I sprint a little bit more down the road and turn my head and he's gone. To me, I don't know if this is explainable. When his body went through mine, I felt a cold breeze. Does anyone have any ideas on how this man walked through me, didn't say a word to me, and then danced near the brush? Maybe I just experienced a supernatural presence for the first time. Either way, I am doing that walk again every single day till I see something like that happen. Ask Reddit. I grew up in rural South Carolina. My mother comes from a family that's had several experiences with the paranormal. She would always tell me about her experiences growing up in her mother's house. For whatever reason, the paranormal experiences didn't stop with my grandmother or my mother, because I too had several run-ins with the paranormal while growing up directly across from my grandmother's house. When I was around the ages of 3 to 5, both of my parents worked long hours, so I would have to babysit my mom's first cousin, a woman who had been known to be trouble on the family. But my parents reluctantly allowed her to babysit me out of financial convenience. While she would babysit me along with her own stepdaughter, who was my age, she would abuse me verbally and emotionally. If I didn't want to eat, she would call me horrible names and make the girl laugh at me and call me names along with continuous verbal and mental abuse. As a child, I remember it being traumatizing, and I thought she was the meanest person I had ever met. However, as a small child, I was never able to articulate her actions to my parents to the point where they could really understand my fear of her. During the times that I would be babysat by this woman, things started getting weird. Several times when I would walk into my dark bedroom, or even a dark hallway, a tall, short-haired woman with glasses would appear to me out of nowhere. It was almost like she would rise up from the floor and just stare at me. I don't think she ever said anything to me, but it was like she wanted to talk to me. But I'd always just run out of the room as fast as I could once I got out of my frozen in fear state. The thing is, I would become so paralyzed with fear that I would block it out of my mind almost immediately to try to convince myself that it wasn't real. These sightings happened numerous times over those few years, and I still remember it vividly. I never told anybody about this until a few years ago when I told my mom. I described the woman with enough detail that she said, "That sounds like your great-aunt Maddie who passed away before you were born." It just so happens that Maddie was the mother of the woman who was babysitting me, the woman that many in our family believed that she had something to do with Maddie's mysteriously quick death. That Christmas when I was about 20, after I told my mother about this, she told me to tell her sister, my aunt, about my story. I began to describe what I saw, the tall woman with short hair and glasses. My aunt also confirmed that I was seeing my great-aunt Maddie. That night they showed me the old pictures of her for the first time, and sure enough, I was looking at old photographs of the woman who used to appear to me as a child. A woman who several other members of my mother's family has reported seeing over the years after her death. I truly believe that to this day she was appearing to me to protect me from her daughter. My shadow guardian and everything he told me before he left. Now that that's out of the way, I want to talk about Thomas. I haven't seen or heard from him in a year, but originally found him in an abandoned city outside the Bell Witch Cave. I was a Freemason's building, or it was a Freemason's building, I'm sure, and me and the friends I took had to climb into the second-story window. We had planned to go to the cave, but didn't realize it was seasonal. So instead, I had the awesome idea to just bring a Ouija board, light candles, and do the whole seance thing and talk to whatever was outside of the cave. A few minutes after we set up, whatever it was did not want us playing with it. I had driven almost 2 hours to get there, so we persisted. I've been to many, many haunted places in my life, but never before had I been yanked by my arm by something as a sign to get the hell out. I'll leave a bunch of details here in between, but fast forward and the shadow figure I was once afraid of had suddenly become a 9-foot guardian and informant. Most mediums can connect with the living and the non-living, whereas I can't. I can only connect with the dead and to a limited degree. Thomas helped me fill that gap in my mind, and was able to show me images that connected to other people asking me for advice. One night I was helping a friend who was out of state, and he asked me to ask some questions about Thomas himself. Thought it was a cool little idea since I didn't know much about him or shadow people in general. Here's where it gets strange, but try to keep reading or listening. When you meditate, the highest level is an area I call the void of the mind. It's dark, you can do whatever you'd like, and you're a beacon. I do this when I'm looking for spirits or trying to channel. Thomas claimed that he was, quote-unquote, born of the void. He explained that there are many more like him, but he was part of a separate mindset of a different mindset of entities. There were the ones who fed on human energy and incited fear and sadness to receive it. Then there were ones who traveled with humans to high-volume energy, as he put it. Places like funeral homes, nightclubs, schools, and other compressed areas is where they would reside. Specifically, Thomas hung around the cave when it was open to feed off the fear the cave-goers experienced, then retreated into the abandoned city to retain his energy until the next season. Because Thomas travels by the void, he can go anywhere at any time, but obviously prefers to be away from the sunlight, and they typically won't share a space with another shadow person, unless it's a territorial problem. He also told me that they cannot die as people do. They fizzle up when they grow weak, and they cease to exist. The lower-class shadow people, Thomas was about a middle in my opinion, typically get absorbed by other entities, separate species of malevolent energy. His voice gets picked up by a spirit box as well, as one time me and my friends were being berated by something and somebody yelled over them, "Shut up and you shut your mouth." Glanced over and Thomas was popping his head through the wall. He protected me insistently, and many things wouldn't even dare approach when Thomas was around. Little random fun fact. Sometimes Thomas was not physically present, but he could be in separate places all at once. He was there, but he wasn't, if that makes any sense. Home invasion. My childhood best friend, we'll call her Nikki, came to stay with me for the week of my birthday. As teenagers, we would pull all-nighters and sleep all day. My ex-boyfriend, and we're going to call him Jay, was supposed to come over. The place was for Jay to come over, or rather the plan was for Jay to come over around 7 or 8 in the morning and hang out. Not sure why that sounded so exciting at the time. Now I'm here looking at it like, it's so lame. Anyway, it started to hit around 8:30 a.m. and Nikki and I were starting to get tired from our all-nighter. So we decided to try and watch a movie to keep ourselves awake. Even though it was 2015, my mom still had one of those old combo TVs that were popular in the late 90s and early 2000s. You know, the ones with the combined DVD and VHS features. It's slightly important to the story that I add that I had Titanic on VHS, and the VHS version is 2 separate tapes due to its length. About 45 minutes to an hour into the movie, I texted Jay and asked him where he was, just due to him being late. He said he was riding his skateboard to my house, since his mom wouldn't give him a ride and he was 30 minutes away. It was time for me to put the second tape in, but before I could, Nikki and I heard the doorknob of the front door jiggle pretty aggressively for a quick second. Now, it's important to note I always made sure everything was constantly locked, due to the anxiety of someone breaking in. This included the screen door. Nikki and I looked at each other completely confused, and we were 100% convinced that he was trying to scare us. So I called him to see if I'd hear his phone ring outside. I didn't, but when he answered, I surely heard all the traffic. He was riding by. That was a dead giveaway that it wasn't him at the door. He also said it would be another 10 minutes. I looked at Nikki, she looked at me, and then the doorknob started jiggling again. I ran across the room and locked the bedroom door and the bathroom door. The knob was still shaking like crazy, and Nikki and I started to fully freak the fuck out. I called my mom while she was at work, and she was crying how scared we were and asking her to call the police to come to the house. Once she answered the phone, the jiggling stopped. She was making the same assumption that Jay was pranking us, but after I told her the situation, she started getting worried. The next thing I know, I hear a slam and heavy footsteps on the hardwood floor in the living room, pacing around. Nikki and I are both completely frozen and stopped talking, which freaked my mom out. She kept yelling into the phone asking what the hell was going on, and out of fear of someone being in the house, I hung up on her. The footsteps stopped for about 10 seconds, and then stomp, stomp, stomp. It was running down the hallway and stopped at the door. The knob started jiggling like how you'd see in a horror movie. Nikki started crying and saying, "I thought you said you locked the doors, Kay, and now someone's in your house." The jiggling stops. The footsteps are pacing up and down the hall. and we start hearing what sounded like somebody rummaging through the kitchen. I paused and looked at her with my eyes tearing up from the fear. I did. She then said, "Wait, we didn't even hear the screen door, and that door's really loud." Our chat was interrupted by Jay calling me. I answered the phone whispering, and he said that he was there and asked if I could unlock the screen door because he went to open it and it couldn't open. I looked at Nikki and said, "Here's what we're going to do. Jay's outside right now. We're going to open the door and we're going to run." She nodded, and we both visibly shaking like leaves in the process. I undid the lock, threw the door back, and we both took off running down the hallway to the front door, unlocked the deadbolt and knob, unlocked the screen, and Jay was standing on the porch. We ran right past him and into the middle of the front yard. Jay asked what was wrong. We both said somebody was inside. He immediately went into the house and looked in the kitchen, the laundry room, and every bedroom. He came out and said no one was in there at all. Feeling a little bit more comfortable, all three of us walked back into the house. I went to the laundry room to check the back door. It was deadbolted, and the knob was locked. I looked at Nikki and Jay and said, "No one's here and the deadbolt's locked." Nikki said, "They could have locked it when they went out the back." I said, "No, Nikki, they couldn't have. The deadbolt locks from inside." I called my mom back and told her the rest of what happened. She was sobbing hysterically that we were okay. Once again, words will never describe how scared we both were. So vulnerable due to not having a weapon and even being afraid to escape out the window if there was actually somebody in the house. But I know for a fact it wasn't an actual person, since this had happened months ago with my friend Mandy. Except when it happened with Mandy, all we heard was footsteps. Whatever spirit this was starting to seem more aggressive. Paranormal bathroom break. When I was in middle school, my parents sent me off to summer sleepaway camp. Your standard outdoor adventure, song singing, marshmallow roasting shit show. I was not a willing participant. Don't get me wrong, I love the outdoors, but a month away from home, my Tamagotchi collection, and my own bed was not my cup of tea at 12. The layout of the campground was fairly standard. To my recollection, there was a large mess hall, a ball pit, ropes of course, and a winding path leading up to 6 cabins that we called home. The cabin closest to everything was the bathrooms. The rest were all boy and girl separated housing. The weirdest thing about this layout, though, were the front doors to the cabins all faced away from the main path and towards the woods. Though it was easy to find your way around, it was definitely daunting when you had to go to a midnight stroll to go use the restroom. And that's really where our story begins, with my small bladder, my anxious mind, and a walk to the woods to go pee. When you had to use the restroom, it was a short trail along the right side of the cabin to a dirt path that led towards the larger buildings. At night, this path was lined with large construction lights and volunteer counselors that made sure none of the campers got any nightly shenanigans underway. It was very easy to find, heavily illuminated, and though still mildly terrifying, completely safe. It was also one of my biggest camp fears. I woke up roughly around 2 a.m. and couldn't wait until morning to pee. I was not happy, walking out into the cold air, staring straight into the woods, and accepting my fate of an uncomfortable nightly stroll. The small path around the right of the cabin led directly to the larger dirt path, and though facing away from the lights, was still fairly easy to visualize. I made sure I was properly equipped with flashlight in hand and started my journey. Just a few steps, when it happened, everything went black. I mean, completely black. I couldn't see my hand directly in front of me black. I stumbled forwards, wondering if maybe the lights went out. My hands just hadn't adjusted. My eyes hadn't adjusted either. I knew where the path was, and I was flailing. But the more I walked, the more twigs and sticks I felt sliding against my legs. The further I went, the higher they became. I stopped. It had been about 2 minutes of walking and I still couldn't see a thing. That's when I noticed the noise had also stopped. The drone of the forest, you know, the crickets chirping, your standard late-night ambient noise. It wasn't there. I panicked and turned. 2 steps toward the way I came, and all of a sudden I was back and standing directly in front of the door of my cabin. The lights illuminated the cabin itself, the trees swaying in the night air. Everything seemed normal again. Thinking I was dreaming or attempting to block out whatever the fuck I just experienced, I walked forward again towards the right. My will to pee was too strong to contemplate anything else. And then, darkness. I was surrounded by nothing. The more I walked, the more I felt the woods surrounding me, but I still couldn't see. I turned more quickly this time, running towards the direction I believed the cabin to be in, and I was at the front door. My flashlight was gone. Now, one typically, after an experience like this, would not make the decision to continue attempting the midnight stroll to the bathhouses. I did. I felt smarter about it, this time for sure, trailing my fingers along the right side of the cabin as I attempted to make the turn onto the larger dirt path one more time. Nothing disappeared. I rounded the corner, got the helpful nod from the counselor on duty, and made my way into the bathroom and back with no further issue. When I curled up in bed, I chalked it all up to a dream, my mind playing tricks on me, and in the morning my cabin counselor did too, until she saw my legs. I was rushed off to the nurse for the large mud-covered gashes, multiple bug bites, and unexplained rash. To this day, I still don't know what I experienced, or if it was even paranormal in nature, but I remembered the quiet, the black, and the wonder. Does anyone know what could have happened to me that night? Or has anybody had a similar experience? Not the crone, but maybe her counterpart. I debated even posting, but it's 4 a.m. and I'm afraid to fall back asleep. Hoping for some genuine insight. I chose the title only because of a documentary premiere I recently saw. The film was about a female spirit, and I'm definitely getting aggressive male energy, but it's a long shot and I couldn't think of anything better. I did have a couple weird dreams and some panicky thoughts after, but I'm dealing with something I've never had happen before. Last night I had a dream where I was on my couch talking to a friend, and her eyes got really wide. When I looked on the balcony, there was this huge deformed figure on the porch. As soon as I turned around, it noticed, so I went to hide in the bathroom. I know. Without being super graphic, this thing came in and I met a very violent end, which I felt every second of, by the way. Normally, I can chalk these dreams up to something, but I felt weird even coming in my room today. About 30 minutes ago, I woke up from another dream. This male figure is starting to look very human now. There were about 4 or 5 different scenarios where it kept trying to take something, or make me take something, or make me drink something. But anytime I would figure it out, everyone would reset, like in a movie. Scene 1 didn't work, so we'll try scene 2 type of a thing. He had a wife and daughter, and I remember her telling me to get back in the car after I figured out the last one. The last thing I remember is being in an office trying to get someone to help me. They gave me a drink, but it had something metal in it. I woke up gagging and felt like I swallowed something. My dream shapeshifter is back. I had a dream I was at my friend's, but she lived in a huge apartment with all glass windows. I was walking down a long hallway and saw a man breaking in, so I ran to get a weapon and she said, "I got it." I still went to grab something, but when I got to them, they were already standing off. She grabbed lighter fluid and doused him and lit the flame, but before it got him, he grabbed her. They both started burning and he said that he wasn't dying alone. I managed to help her get away and call 911. When I turned around, he was gone, but there were pieces of flesh on the floor. They took us both to the hospital. I was looking for her, and she was talking to a caseworker whose face kept shifting. It looked like a normal human, but it couldn't get its face right. It kept shifting from male to female in an almost fluid way. I got angry and asked why they weren't talking to me. She was in pain, and I was the one who saw everything. The quote-unquote person got someone else to get me and put me with other burn patients. I don't remember getting burned. I woke up crying. I've actually never seen faces in dreams until these past 3. I've always known who they were generally supposed to be, but never saw actual faces. I'm afraid to tell my family because I don't want to upset them, and I also don't want them to think I'm completely insane, which is how I'm feeling at the moment. Fire alarm ghost. In the last few weeks, my fire alarm has been randomly going off, and I think it's a ghost. It all started a few weeks ago while in my kitchen. The downstairs fire alarm started going off. I assumed it was a fire and I panicked. I ran downstairs, but there was no smoke. I got the alarm down and pushed the button for hush mode. It would quiet for a few seconds and then it started again. I was getting increasingly worked up, extremely noise sensitive, you could say, and kind of yelled helplessly, "Please stop!" And it immediately stopped. The second time happened 2 weeks ago. I was sleeping, and at exactly 3 a.m. I woke up to the alarm going off downstairs. Or so I thought. I got up and ran down, panicking again, thinking there was a fire. My cat was in danger. But when I got halfway down the stairs, the alarm wasn't coming from there. I was so disoriented from the abrupt wake-up that I went back upstairs, and it wasn't coming from there either. And then it just stopped. My house is quite small and only has 2 alarms. The third time I was mid-shower. Alarm is outside the bathroom, with the door locked. The alarm went off, and when I jumped out, the bathroom door was open. I took it down and pushed the hush button, and it wouldn't turn off for about 10 minutes. I was in tears, having a panic attack, and it just stops again. After I finished my shower, standing in the bathroom, the locked door opened again. 4th time was this morning. Sitting in my office, the alarm starts. I can see it from my desk, and I got up and brought my chair over to hit the button, and just as I'm about to touch it, it stops again. At this point, it feels like some cruel game. Every time it goes off, I get hit with this wave of insane panic. House fires are one of my oldest and deepest fears. I feel like I'm being toyed with. It never happens when other people are around, too. Before anyone suggests it's the battery, it's both alarms. And they're 10-year alarms that were replaced a little over a year ago. The low battery has a specific beep and says low battery. The fire alarm double beeps and says fire in English and French, and this is what keeps going off. It is not a CO2 detector. The story of a drowned landlord. It all started in 2019. I and 8 other people created an organization dedicated to the history of our city. The town is no larger, only 18,000 people, plus adjacent villages. In one of the villages, a few months later, we were invited to a village where the landowner Zembrodsky lived. People told stories that they constantly see a landowner walking by the river, and that he cannot calm down until he drowns someone. Fortunately, the landowner's estate itself was destroyed, and the new houses had already appeared in its place. But we still walked along the river. And to be honest, I'm a person who's skeptical about ghost stories, but walking there was unpleasant. I was tormented by some kind of unpleasant feeling of anxiety. History haunted us, and we started digging through the archives. As it turned out, in the 1800s, the landowner Zembrodsky actually lived there, who drowned in the river near the estate. But what became surprising was that 30 years later, in the 1850s, another person was drowning in the same place, and after a while, another and another. And so the last person who drowned there turned out to be my grandmother's nephew, about whom we don't talk much. I kind of knew that he drowned, but I didn't know where it happened. The details were that 2 children, 5 and 6 years old, were walking in winter. But then they went to a river, which was about 1.5 kilometers from the house. A man passing by saw 2 floundering boys and ran to save them. He managed to grab one and somebody pulled the other way. The second boy said that they went to look at his uncle, who was walking along the river, and he didn't remember what happened next. To this day, he doesn't tell the details of that day. This is where our research ends for now. I don't know if it was a paranormal phenomenon or if there's an explanation for everything, but as a historian, I liked this story because thanks to it, we have on our lips the names of people who died tragically. Priest. The next story will tell about a priest whose story began in 1883 when he was appointed rector of the Archangel Michael Church in the village of Katsakatsia, Lopan. The priest was very loved and many warm memories of him are still preserved. But 1918 change came. The revolution and civil war brought a terrible time when brother stood up against brother. The village passed from hand to hand like a leaf in the wind. In December of 1918, a gang came to the walls of the priest's house. They were interested in church values. The priest refused to hand them over, and he was severely tortured. But he remained silent. The bandits dragged him onto the street and killed him right in front of his house on December 28th. He was buried in a local cemetery, but unfortunately, the grave has not survived. Local residents say that from time to time the sounds of church chants can be heard from this house, as if they continue to sound forever. But sometimes, especially at night, when someone passes by the house, they catch the smell of incense, which brings back memories of the priest. Another mysterious aspect of the story is that some claim to have seen an old man with a large beard sitting on the porch of the house. These unusual phenomena give this story even more mystery and mysticism. While we were looking around the house and talking, suddenly the door inside the house slammed shut by itself. Whether this was a paranormal event or just a draft, we can't say for sure. But for me, it was an amazing discovery, since the story became a valuable addition to our collection. The Man on the Stairs. I grew up in a 60s, 70s house, about 45 minutes outside London. It was your usual creaky floorboard, barely carpeted sort of place. The first time we saw the man on the stairs, it was me. I was around 10 at that time, and I used to dry my hair on the landing, next to the banister, which had slats so you could see through it. I had my hair flipped over my head and I saw who I thought was my dad, in his raincoat and carrying his briefcase, walking up the stairs. I flipped my hair back over to give him a hug like I usually did, but he wasn't there. I assumed he'd turned around and gone back downstairs, so I ran down and asked Mom where he'd gone. Only she told me that he wasn't home yet. I felt a bit creeped out, but it obviously went out of my head and I didn't really come up with it again. The next time I heard about him, I was 18. I'd met my now husband maybe a year before, and my parents had divorced by this point, so it tended to be my mom in the house with us there in the week. One Sunday morning, I got a call from her, asking if I was okay. I assured her that I was, and asked her what was wrong, and she said that there had been banging on the front door at 3 a.m. Our front door had 2 frosted glass panels, top and bottom, so you could make out shapes through it. and we had a street lamp opposite which lit it during the night. When she came to the top of the stairs to have a glance and see if she could see anything, she said she saw someone with a bag waiting. She started downstairs and stopped herself. She turned back to her bedroom and looked down toward the glass porch. We couldn't see anyone. When she went back to the top of the stairs, they had vanished. She thought we had an argument and I'd come home since they were carrying a bag. But once she started playing it in her head, she realized the person was taller than me, a bigger build, and was wearing a raincoat. The only other time I heard about him was from my brother. Now, he's very scientific. He doesn't believe in ghosts or the paranormal at all, which is what amazed me even more. When he was younger and still living at home, he used to stay up until the late hours playing Xbox, like you do. And one night he finished up, didn't bother turning on any lights, went to the bottom of the stairs and started walking up when he saw him. A man in a raincoat and a briefcase standing at the top of the stairs. He blinked a couple of times and stepped back to the 2 steps and tried to click on the light. And when he looked back, he was gone. The weird thing here is that me and my mom never mentioned anything to him, as he's very vocal about how daft he thinks all this is, but the description was perfect. We never found out who he was. As far as we could find out, nobody died at that house. My mother passed away in 2020, and we sold the house. So I always wonder if they're seeing him or if he moved on without her. Or with her. I got pushed out of a place I was staying at. I was living in San Diego when this happened. My mother, myself, and her boyfriend decided to stay at his mother's house while we were looking for a place of our own. I was staying in a room that was attached to the hallway, which leads to the front door. In the room there was a lamp, a TV, and a bed. The bed had wheels, meaning that it could be moved out if needed. So I was fully in bed when the paranormal activity started. It was small at first, with strange feet movements on the sheets like an animal was walking on top of them. But the mother had no animals. I tried to ignore it for I believe, and that giving the ghosts attention would just make things worse. That didn't work, because the next thing to happen was creaking noises from the wheels, as if someone was moving the bed. The bed wasn't being moved, though. I had turned on the lamp and the TV to try to calm myself down. That didn't really stop anything, though, because the sounds were still happening. My mother had noticed the light on and maybe heard the TV because she opened the door and came in. She didn't seem to notice the sounds because she had just told me to go to sleep. I was having trouble staying awake and had fallen asleep when the animal movement had returned. Something told me to open my eyes. I don't know what, but I did. And when I did, I saw that I wasn't in the room anymore. I was in the hallway. The bed had been moved there by some unseen force. The bed where I had my feet were facing the open front door. Then it ran with the bed in its hands towards the front door, basically pushing me and the bed out to the dark outside. I woke up and I was in the room again. The noise and animal movements had stopped. After this, everything was fine. I hadn't had an experience since this one. One last thing. I asked the mother about the room I was in. She had told me her husband used the room before he died. She then told me that she had events happen in the home since then. When she had visitors stay in the room, her husband would mess with them to scare them out. I don't know why I'd forgotten that detail till now, but I thought I'd put that here too. Weird stuff during second shift, and I'm still at work. So I work armed security in a rich neighborhood near Fort Worth, filled with old houses. Specifically, I work at 2 houses. One is occupied by a widowed lady in her 70s, while the second house is unoccupied. Co-workers and the lady herself have reported seeing and feeling apparitions in the first house. I haven't heard of anything in the second house until tonight. I'm still here. I'll be off in a little over 30 minutes. We have cameras all over the place that we're supposed to observe for any abnormal movement or activity. Usually, all I see are the occasional raccoons or squirrels. Tonight has been different, though. One camera in particular looks towards a set of oak doors. This is one of the only two that doesn't kick over the night vision when it gets dark. There's 4 trees in view, as well as some shrubbery. It's a calm night here. No wind, no rain, nothing. Periodically, I've seen one particular branch start shaking violently, like something is grabbing a fruit tree trying to make stuff fall to the ground, right? And this is right above where there's been a shadow in the brush. It's not the brush itself. I can see through all the leaves to the wall, since the brush isn't that thick. The shadow is in the form of someone standing there. Whenever I go out there with my flashlight to look, the vigorous shaking stops and the shadow isn't there. Keep in mind, there's no wildlife moving about in this part of the property. They're always in the back, where there's the least amount of movement. I walk back there every couple of hours, but that's about it. The part where I'm seeing the movement is in the driveway, where my truck is parked. I'm the only one here. My relief shows up at midnight. At one point, I saw what looked like the shadow bending over and reaching down for something and then standing back up. Whenever I go out there, I talk, whether to myself or to whatever entity is moving about here. I'm not sure if I should be talking to it because I don't want to make it think I'm instigating it. This kind of stuff scares the shit out of me. I'm not one to believe in ghosts or other stuff like that. My brain has always tried to explain it away, or see some rational reason behind whatever's happening. But this stuff is beyond my explanation. My mind plays worst-case scenarios crap over and over, making me even more scared. I'm afraid something will actually appear, something will interact with my voice when I'm out there. I talk because it calms me, though. I don't know what to think of it. I just want to get the hell out of here for the night, and then I worry about, what if whatever this nonsense is attaches itself to me and follows me home? Ugh, my brain hates me. Shadow People, Southern Nevada. So other than with my friends and family, this is the first time I'm sharing this story. Full disclosure. Before this experience, I've always been very skeptical of paranormal experiences, and a very, you could say in quotes, there's always another explanation for those things type of person. Anyways, this takes place in summertime, 4 years ago, if my memory serves me correctly. On a trip starting in the Las Vegas area of southern Nevada and ending in Mammoth Lakes, California. My husband, then boyfriend, and I were taking a road trip, so I could show him one of my favorite camping and hitchhiking places in California, and I was so excited to do so. It's a moderately long drive, but I'd done it before, and it wasn't really worrying me. It was later in the day when we left, after we had both gotten off work for the weekend. The beginning half of the drive was normal, just like any other drive. But once we reached the town of Beatty, it got really weird. Really fast. After reaching, could be Beatty or Beatty, Beatty, you guys. After reaching Beatty, we both started feeling really uncomfortable, and for a brief moment couldn't figure out why. Shortly after, we started seeing figures that looked like dark, stretched-out silhouettes of people in the path of our headlights. They would appear to run in and out of our sight in the road and then disappear very shortly before making contact with them with the car. They would not appear behind us on the ground, so we knew there was no contact made. It was a constant barrage of them, and I didn't know what to think of this. At first, I thought it was someone playing a prank on us, but it continued on for an hour. We didn't stop, because by the time it was dark out, I was too scared that it would end up being a ruse for a dangerous situation, i.e. a serial killer or carjacking or something worse. We also smelled the very distinct smell of fire or burning. Due to the silhouettes that we'd been seeing, we were far too afraid to stop and see what it could be, so we kept driving to our destination. The smell persisted for the entirety of the drive there from Beatty. It never waned. We finally got to Mammoth. We debated back and forth on whether we should go out and check underneath the hood to make sure the smell wasn't something from our actual engine or something. It was pitch black outside. At this point, we were so terrified we actually considered just driving back home entirely. The smell of burning was incredibly strong and had no discernible source inside the car. Eventually, I got out and went to check outside the car, found no trace of the smell outside. We determined that the smell had to be coming from something inside the car and started investigating more. After a while, we located the source as a blanket that was between two other blankets in the stack that we had brought. The top and bottom blankets were ice cold and had no odor. The middle blanket smelled so strongly of smoke that it burned my nose to sniff it. It was very hot to the touch, too. We had no explanation for this. Scared but not sure what else to do, we dropped the quote-unquote weird blanket outside the car, locked the doors, and went to sleep. After doing so, we didn't experience anything else. We aren't sure if this is just a coincidence or not. We stayed and enjoyed the rest of our trip, and after a day we pretty much forgot about the experience until it was time to head back home. On our way back home, this time during the daylight, we passed a house in Beatty that looked like it had been burned down, covered in graffiti of various symbols and images that looked to be sigils, possibly. I wish I had the thought to grab a picture at the time, admittedly, but I was driving and just wanted to get home. We've always wondered if something at that house is what caused our experience. My best friend owns property there, and when I went back to the town with her, we couldn't find that house. She mentioned that there had recently been some kind of project to clean up the town and removed abandoned buildings, and I wonder if it had been removed already. To this day, we aren't sure what we experienced. A friend of my husband suggested that it could have been several things, shadow people being one of them. After looking into it a bit, I think they could be right, but I don't know enough about these types of things to be certain. Has anyone else had any similar experiences around that area of Nevada? Any ideas what this could have been? I still can't explain this happening to me. So this happened to be a few years ago, but I always mention this story to friends and family. When I was about 18, I was still living with my mom. We have a normal 2-bedroom home in Scotland. My dad passed away when I was 16, and I had some stories that revolve around him, but this one I don't think is related. So it's probably about 12 or 1 p.m., and I'm drifting off to sleep slowly until I hear 2 voices, a female and male voice whispering in my hallway outside of my room. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, and they sounded like they were talking on my stairs. Now, I've never heard any outdoor noises through my bedroom door. If it was my neighbors talking, I would 100% hear them through my bedroom window, and this sounded direct, like there wasn't much space between us at all. At this point, I'm hoping that my mom didn't turn off the radio and TV downstairs. I get up from my bed, and the talking doesn't stop as I do this, and I go to my wardrobe where I take out the only thing I thought of, my fencing sword. Really embarrassing choice now that I think about it. You can't actually do much harm with it. I think it's cool. I stepped up to the door and the talking didn't stop. It sounded like a European language, maybe German, Turkish, or something. I live in Scotland and I speak English, Polish, and Spanish, and it didn't sound like anything I'd recognize. I even heard the seeking of the stairs, as if somebody was slowly moving around on them. I genuinely at this point mentally prepared myself to face 2 intruders. I swung the door open, there was nothing, silence. I ran up to the hallway window. Nobody was outside. No neighbors, no nothing. I ran downstairs. Nothing's on, everything's off. Complete silence. All doors locked, etc., etc. Needless to say, I barely slept that night. I've been thinking about it to this day, and what trips me out is how I consistently heard them. From the bed to the wardrobe to the door. I couldn't hear noises that whole time, and I can guarantee you I was wide awake. Weird dream turned out to be a 9/11 nightmare. I've been having visions and dreams of spirits for 40 years, even seeing stuff that made me question reality. This particular dream happened in 2011, 10 years past 9/11 in 2001. In my dream, I saw a woman with brown hair and dressed conservatively, with very pretty earrings on. The jewelry really struck me for some reason. As we went forward in the dream, she moved to a desk facing a large outside window. She sat down and suddenly I was seeing through her eyes. I saw an unusual vision of blue sky followed by the nose of an airplane coming to the window, then into the building. The dream blacked out and I woke up shaking, hot in my bed. I looked up at my bedroom window and heard a voice say, "It was quick and painless. I just needed someone to know." I got up and sketched out the image. I saw her and the jewelry in particular. I also wrote down the name I saw. Just a first name, but also initials. I also knew the type of company that she worked for and roughly where she would have been located. I did some research over the next week and I found her, the company and the floor that matched my vision. I can only think that because I also have an affinity for the same type of jewelry and I'm sensitive. I was able to hear her and let her know that she was remembered, not forgotten. Every year since, I have the feeling from the dream aftermath come over me and remember her by just lighting a candle and saying a little prayer for her.